our work session. Welcome, everybody. And we have our, oh my gosh, our lobbyist extraordinaire, Kylie Grano. Welcome, Kylie.
But I'm not the only one who does that. Thank you so much.
I know there's a presentation, so as that gets pulled up, I'll kind of start us off a little bit. And welcome to staff that are here. I hope you learned something fun. We appreciate that you're giving up an extra hour. So we are talking about this for a number of reasons. One, because it's super fun and long session is right around the corner. And because we learned so much in the last couple years with regards to engaging with the legislature, especially with bathrooms. And bathrooms was successful because of a few things we had in place. One, relationships. Two, there was an understanding of what our legislators understood, had already heard about the Visioning Action Plan, so it wasn't new information to them to highlight a piece of that. And the ARPA money was very unique, right? So we were ready for an opportunity like that. And so we want to make sure we continue to be ready for opportunities, whether we have the joy of being proactive or on the occasion where we have to be reactive and on the defense. But those relationships with legislators, understanding a little bit about the process, because there's formal pieces to this, I think is really critical. So this is an opportunity to learn more about that, to get to know Kylie, and ask any and all questions, because if there's something that is unclear, like the accessing the legislature was made to be difficult on purpose by someone a long time ago, right? Because it's not supposed to be accessible by regular folks. And so if you're confused, it's designed that way. So let's make sure there's you understand all the pieces. I think that's it. Take it away, Kylie.
Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide? And that was a lovely introduction. You covered all of the high points and kind of the meat of what we're talking about. But I did want to reiterate, if anyone on here has questions as we're going through, please raise them as we go, or if you want to save it until the end. I am perfectly comfortable with whatever. And the board chair and I are going to go back and forth on some of the slides and do a little tag team here. So that should be fun. And yeah, I can get talking on this. So also just tell me, that's enough if I get going too long, but I will do my darndest to not. So, okay, what we're going to cover today is this quick list. We're going to talk about bill development. We're going to talk about the legislative process and some of the timelines that are associated with it. We're also going to talk about just kind of the differences between the long and the short sessions and what that looks like. Talk a little bit about the legislative delegation for THPRD and how that's changing now with redistricting, and then a lot of what was just talked about making the ask about how to engage in the legislature, how to make it more accessible, and make sure you know the ins and outs and feel comfortable to do so, because we're going to need you. You're the critical people in this process. Next slide. Oh, should I be looking at the chat too? I just want to make sure I don't miss anything.
I'll pay attention to the chat.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry. Okay.
I apologize about the chat. I'm switching.
No, I got it now. Now I won't be. I was just like, oh shoot, was there already a question? I will. Okay. So this is the legislative process, and the reason I know you can't really read it very well, but I wanted to put it on here because if you go to the Oregon legislative website and you look for like how a bill becomes law, this is the simplified graphic version that they use to educate people. So I just wanted to share with you that it is quite the process. So there really is a very formalized process with lots of steps that are layered. And I like how there's arrows that go back and forth the other way. So that is what they use to teach people about the process. So we're going to try to break that down a little bit into more easily digestible chunks. So next slide. Okay, so these 5 slides, these 5 boxes are virtually the same process you saw, just presented a little bit different. So to go through a very simplified version of how a bill becomes law, an idea becomes a law. Somebody has an idea, and we'll talk a little bit more about that down our presentation a bit, but they get one of their legislators, a representative or a senator, to introduce that idea as a bill into the legislature. And we can talk a little bit more about what that takes. That bill is then assigned to the most relevant committee. And even that step can have some politics involved with it, because there are bills that could actually be in more than one committee. And there are chairs that are more receptive to some ideas than others. And so you also are kind of looking at what committee would you want it to be in front of? Who are the legislators that maybe you know the best and or know the issue the best? So it will get assigned to a committee. It will then be scheduled for an informational hearing. And that is a public hearing where, and several of you have done this as well, you go in and offer testimony in support or in opposition to a bill. The legislators can ask you questions. That is kind of where the airing of the issues takes place. Then after that's over, a work session will be scheduled. In the beginning of session, generally those two things happen on different days, maybe a couple days spread apart. As session nears the end, a lot of times there will be both a public hearing and a work session on the same day as time gets crunched. The work session is where the actual action on that bill takes place. So it is voted on. There are additional questions that can be asked. Generally, it's you can't just sign up to testify in that. They will ask questions, and hopefully you're in the room if they have a question for you. So for any work session that THPRD has a bill for that we're concerned about or that we're working on, I will be there to make sure that if there is something that relates to us, that we are present for it. Let me get back. Okay. And then the work session happens. The vote happens. Hopefully, if it's a bill that we are supporting, it gets voted out of committee with support. Or it may not get voted out of committee. They may choose to not. Or it can be referred if it has, they feel a fiscal impact, a financial ask, they can refer it to one of the subcommittees on ways and means. Those are the money committees. So if they feel like it has a fiscal impact and should be looked at by those who review the budget as well, it can be sent down to one of those committees. And then it will be sent, if it gets its hearing, has a work session, is voted out in support, it will be sent to the floor for a vote. It is then scheduled, and that is something I'll keep track of. In the last couple of sessions, that scheduling for a floor vote has been an interesting process because there have been delay tactics sometimes used, or with a pandemic, they've been trying to limit the number of times that they all have to come into the building or be in the chamber. So they've been trying to do all the bill votes on certain days. So they've been very backlogged, and that's caused a little bit of an issue. So watching that schedule of the vote. But our theoretical bill that's happening, it's gone now to the floor. We're hoping it gets voted on. It will be held a vote. They'll show every single legislator how they voted, yay or nay. And when a bill is on the floor, the champion of that bill, the advocate, or this person assigned to talk to it, will give a little rundown, a summary of what it is, why they support it, and why you should vote for it. And the opportunity is provided to anyone on the floor, any of the legislators, to make a comment in support or with a question or expressing opposition. They will hold the vote. Once that happens, hopefully it passes as our pretend bill. And then it is sent to the other side. So say the start in the House, it will then be sent to its second chamber, and it will do everything again from the assigned to a committee down. So we'll replay that whole process again down to the floor vote. If any change is made to that bill in its second chamber, it has to go back to the original chamber for a concurrence vote. So if a comma is changed, if a something, that's why sometimes you'll hear like, well, it's fine, wait, it'll just deal with it because we can deal with that in rules or something along those lines. So that's where things can get a little interesting as well. So once it's done with floor vote, hopefully it had no changes. It's now passed the House and the Senate. The president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House sign off on it, and it's sent to the governor. They have 5 days in session, 30 days outside of session to sign that bill. They can take no action or they can veto it. If they veto it, 2/3 of the legislature can override that veto. I think I got all those numbers right. If anybody has any corrections, let me know. But that's the very simplified version of that previous graphic in a quick nutshell, because I'm guessing many of you kind of knew several of those steps. So just trying to walk you through it. Does anyone have any questions or anything about what that looks like? Okay, cool. Next slide. Okay. So another thing we just wanted to touch base on is the different types of sessions, because I'll talk a lot about how this is going to be our long session. Before 2010, we only had one type of session, and that was our long session. It was held every other year. In the odd number years, we have a session that can be up to 160 days, and that is our typical, it's been there forever session. It is the one where the state budget is adopted. It's January, end of January through end of June, hopefully end of June, not later. So that's our big long one, and that's kind of doing the big policy work, the big ideas, all those things should really be are hashed out in that longer session. The short session is a newer thing that was passed by initiative back in by 2010. So now we have those shorter sessions in even number years. They can be up to 35 days in length, and they were really meant, the way it was talked about when it was first put forth, was for emergencies, for some sort of something happened with legislation that was just passed, an unintended consequence. It's not being implemented the way people assumed. It was really kind of to tweak bills that had just been passed because something had gone kind of drastically wrong, and or for emergencies that they couldn't be addressed. They didn't want to wait to the whole next long session. That's not how they're being treated, though, those short sessions. There's a whole lot of policy work happening in those short sessions. There's new ideas that haven't been, they're not even in bill form or anything. They're brand new big policy ideas. So it's been a little bit of a transition for many of, and even legislators will still be like, I just thought this was for kind of this, to make some tweaks, to do some specific things. So you're seeing a lot more happen in those 35 days than it were intended. It's very interesting because in the long session, there are no bill limits. A legislator can introduce as many bills as he wants in those long sessions up until a certain point. There are committee bills as well. There's lots of different vehicles. In the short session, they've been introducing bill limits. So this last one, the legislator had 2 bills that they were allowed to introduce, and I believe committees had 3 bills that they were allowed to introduce, and the 2 leadership offices had a couple bills that they could also do, which really limited the number of bills to a couple hundred that happened in that short session. In the long session, you're going to see upwards of 3,000 bills introduced, with only a couple hundred of them actually being passed and put into law. So that is a lot of policy ideas, great ideas being just out there and being discussed. So those are two types of sessions that we have. So if I'm talking about short session, it's the even numbered 35 days. Long session is that really meaty, passing our state budget, doing a lot of the big policy lifts with a lot of bills. There's a couple of special circumstances I wanted to note here about special sessions. We are very familiar with special sessions in Oregon right now after the last year and a lot of the things that they addressed due to pandemic and also housing issues that were brought up during special sessions along with other issues. Also, I wanted to note that sessions can be extended by 2/3 vote. So a lot of times when I say that I want it to be done before the end of June, generally that the limit of days is right before the 4th of July holiday. And when they don't get their work done, they can vote to extend it past the 4th of July holiday, which generally means you're working over whatever that weekend is, because that's when the session is going until midnight or whatever it is. So trying to get their work done by the end of June is always a good and noble goal. Okay, so next slide. So this is another kind of part of the timeline with session that isn't, you have your sessions January of both years, different lengths, but I wanted to note kind of different time periods within the process. So the interim is the period of time between legislative sessions. So when the legislature is not in, that's called the interim. There are 3 series of days, June, September, and December, where they hold interim legislative days. These are when the committees hold informational hearings. No action can be taken. They're not voting on bills, they're not passing bills. They are just doing informational hearings to, a lot of times it's to hear how previously enacted bills are doing, how it's implementation for them to report, or it's a concept that somebody is wanting to do. They're doing the work a little bit ahead of time, educating a committee about like, hey, here's a problem. We want to, and educating them on, and here's one of the solutions we think we're going to propose in the next session. So it's a great way to launch an idea that you have before the actual session starts. There are a few exceptions to that. There are executive appointments that happen during those legislative interim days when the Senate is called in and they can approve or adopt the governor's executive appointment. So there's that. There's also the emergency board, which is the interim Ways and Means Committee that can allocate funds during the interim outside of the legislative body, so they can take action and deal with emergency funding situations or issues. So you'll hear it called the E-Board. the emergency board. It's the fiscal agent when legislative session is not in. So then there's another period I call pre-session. So pre-session is late August, September through session, and that is really when the bill schedule picks up. So in the long session, if you want your bill ready to go on day one, so on day one there are several, a couple, usually about 1,000 bills, I think, or so, maybe 2,000 bills printed before a session even starts. So on day one, these bills are ready to go. They were filed with Legislative Council, submitted as a draft back in September. And so that impacts kind of when you think of your idea, when you're putting bills forward, that is all pre that September. They're given to Legislative Council, who are all the incredibly intelligent attorneys who know how to translate language into legalese and into Oregon statute language and know where to kind of put it in statute and pull up the definitions that need to be in there and do that work. We get the drafts back late November, December, a short period of time to take a look at that draft, make any tweaks and whatnot, and then you can decide whether you want to officially have that bill dropped or whether or not you just want to abandon that idea. Those are then put into the hopper. LC will take them from having an LC number to having an actual bill number ready for when they're published for session. So at that beginning of session time, there's a lot of those bills that come out. And then and I want to be really clear, there's not just pre-session bills in either session. You can introduce bills after session has started. It's just those pre-session filed ones kind of have a leg up because they were ready to go on day one, and they can be scheduled for a public hearing right away. And during session, there are deadlines for the movement of bills. So there is a deadline for when that bill has to have its first public hearing. There is a deadline for when it has to have a work session. And then the big deadline, I believe that first hearing one is towards the end of February. Like there's a month for you to get that bill heard and going. And then the very big deadline is that first chamber. So whichever chamber, House or Senate, a bill starts in, it has to be out of that chamber, voted on the floor and moved out, or else it is dead. It can no longer proceed in the process. So that is, I mean, it can be it's a stressful deadline, but it's also one of those ones where if you have a lot of bills you're tracking, that can kind of be a happy day because you can be like, well, now I don't have to worry about these bills anymore because they weren't able to meet that deadline. I will say about pre-session filed bills for the short session, because there are limited numbers of bills, because it is such a short timeline, pre-session filed bills are pretty much it. There are some exceptions to that. There are ways you can amend someone else's bill, and there are a couple committee and leadership bills, but really for the short session, because it is so limited and the duration is so short, and the deadlines for that are pretty much every week. The end of the first week, that has to have had a public hearing. So pre-session filed bills for the short session are the prerequisite. And I will note that there's a whole other process for state budget issues, and I don't know how much you want to go into that, but there are agency budgets that they have to put together to say how much their agency wants and needs and would like to ask for. They submit that to the governor. The governor then puts together her governor's request budget. In past, you'll see like Governor Brown has done kind of her priorities, and she's threaded through what her budget asks are for her priorities, and made like kind of a really nice big package. And it's usually presented around December 1st. Oregon Business Plan does their big meeting then, and she unveils her recommended budget. Then she takes that and she submits it to the legislature. And while it is truly wonderful to be in the governor's recommended budget and to be part of those priorities because that gives to your ask, the legislature takes the governor's recommended budget and says, great, okay, this is one input into our budget process. And they come up with their own legislatively recommended budget. They then do a series of hearings with all of the agencies and their budget requests, and then begin to approve budgets as they go through session. And at the end, they'll have their legislatively approved budget, which is then our budget for the next 2 years.
Kylie, can I add something real quick?
Yes.
I just want to add that I think when you hear, pre-session filed bills were due in September and it's October, it's easy to think, oh, we're too late. But I would argue we can never be too early. So just a different framing, because I know we all have lots of wonderful ideas. So it's never too early to think about 2024, 2025. Thanks, Kylie.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So in sharing that information, it was to say that, so for 2024, I mean, when this session 23 session is over, if we have an idea or a thought or something that's come forward, it is never too early to begin to educate and do outreach and start to develop what the concept should look like. Because if we can be ready for the next September to file a bill, that, I mean, doing so in the spring of the previous year is the perfect time to start developing that. I will also say, and I'm not sure if we get to this in a later slide, that just because we don't have a pre-session file bill and we have an emergency come up or a situation or an aha moment, there are opportunities to address that in a legislative session, even without a pre-session file bill. Even if towards the end of session, there are always unique circumstances where you can amend another bill. You can look at if it's a funding issue, there are ways in which to get allocations that aren't associated with a bill, but just get put into the kind of the big budget reconciliation bill. That's the bill that happens at the end of the session that has all of they call it Christmas tree bill because it has lots of ornaments. It has lots of things for lots of districts. It's the funding for, the courthouse over here or the big project in this district. And so there's always that opportunity as well. So, and I asked a colleague recently who's been doing this even longer than I have, and I said, well, I was thinking the process worked this way, and she's like, one, processes, we know them, but they can always be tweaked, and it's amazing what the leadership can do. Like they always kind of have a little bit of their prerogative, and for different things, you can really see things happen towards the end of session. So there's lots of opportunities, and I would never want to say that we don't have an opportunity. There are times where yes, there's a deadline and it's a hard deadline, but up until those, there's always room for discussion. Thank you for pointing that out too. I hope I didn't make it seem like if you don't get this, you're done.
No, I was just being myself. Sorry, Kylie.
No worries at all. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to kick this over to
Kylie, she gets a break. So maybe you have a brilliant idea. You all have brilliant ideas, so we can skip that part. You all have brilliant ideas. So as discussed, pre-session bill is ideal to set up for success. So during long session, last minute solutions are possible, but very challenging as we went over. So I think one of the most critical roles we can play, regardless of if there's, well, not regardless, but our legislators should have relationships with all of us, and should know us, should hear from us regularly, should be invited to things, and then they can more easily learn about the district and what we're working on, the things that we're passionate about, and that gives us an opportunity to learn about the things they're passionate about. So it's those existing relationships that help get these kind of things done, right? Because let's say we're really excited about a bill where we will need a champion. And so if the first call to a legislator is, I have a bill that I really want you to champion, and they don't know anything about you or the district or the great work that we're doing, like, why the heck would they do that for us, right? So relationships really matter. Let's see, summer fall. As you can imagine, there's lots of partners and potential stakeholders within, we serve 270,000 people. And then many of you already have existing relationships, which is fantastic. Next slide.
I would add one thing.
Sorry, yes, please, Kylie.
No, I'm just going to say that THPRD has done really a wonderful job of keeping your legislators educated and engaged. We provide, on the legislative side, we do some updates regularly to the legislators, but you've also done a really good job of engaging them in different ribbon cuttings and keeping them up to date. So that's, as you had said at the very beginning of the presentation, one of the strengths here is that they're fairly well versed in THPRD's mission and values and vision, and that makes it so much easier to then work with them on actual concepts or needs we might have.
And one of the easiest things for us that we can all do is they have most of them have weekly or biweekly emails that they send out. So sometimes I like to let them know, registration is opening up soon, and sometimes then I'll see it in their email. But just keep them in the know. They are our partners. They can't know everything. We don't know everything, but we know a lot about parks, so we should educate them about parks. So Kylie made this wonderful list about impacting change and what to expect, and she highlighted the pieces that are really owned by us. So knowing the issue, whatever it is that we're advocating for or potentially against, it's our job to know the ins and outs of that issue. And of course, we bring that perspective as residents of Beaverton and as parks leaders. knowing the process, that isn't as important. That's why we have Kylie. What you heard today is essentially what you need to know. There's a formal process and we have to follow it. And Kylie's going to make sure that we hit deadlines. Know the bill, like Kylie mentioned, it's a lot of legalese. So let's say there's a bill that we're supporting or opposing that's 50 pages long. There's no expectation that the ins and outs of that bill and that legalese, but obviously some of the key pieces would be critical. Knowing the legislators, and I think we're going to talk about this in a minute, but with redistricting, of course, there's going to be a lot of new ones. And so we have our work cut out for us. Monitor the process. So Kylie, I know we'll keep Aisha updated about what's going on with bills. When do they have hearings? Where does it make sense and when to plug in us? And our role is really to be contacting legislators, having those meetings with them, testifying, and testifying has never been more accessible. There's now a new state law that it has to be accessible via like phone calls and like Zoom. So I know it's a big ask for folks that work full time with kiddos to say, please drive down to Salem for a 3-minute testimony. But now it's more accessible than ever. And so I'm hoping everyone can participate as able, as interested. I've done it before and, I messed up my words before and it was fine. It happens. And also our role is to thank legislators. That's the easiest part. Thank you for being our champions. Thank you for taking this meeting. Thank you for coming on a tour of our parks so we could tell you all about the great work. That's the easy piece. Next slide.
Can I add one more thing back on that side? Sorry. Just can help myself. The other thing I would note there is on a lot of those pieces on the contact legislators, on the meeting or testifying, a lot of people are worried, as you were just talking about, like the talking points, those kinds of things. I also help make sure that you have all of that information, that you have a breakdown of the bill, you have a breakdown of who the stakeholders and partners are, the name of the committee that you're in front of, the name of the committee chairs. We develop talking points ahead of time. There's a lot of prep that goes into that. So it's never feel like that is only on you to get that ready. And I'll also talk about the meeting with legislators can also be, a lot of people feel intimidated by that. And I would say don't. You will be fully prepared before you go into any meeting ever by who you're meeting with, what committees they serve on, what their brief background, kind of talking points. We'll go over kind of what order we want to talk in. You'll be thoroughly prepped. But all that is to say too, that legislator could care less about me. They see me all the time. And they know I'm a lobbyist. They want to hear from you, from their constituents, from the people who represent their constituents. And I had a meeting that was supposed to be 15 and it ran long and the person didn't stick to the talking points, but it was a heartfelt issue that was happening. And the legislator was so thankful to have heard the story, to have heard that perspective, to whatever, because that's really what helps them become educated and know what the issue really, kind of comprehensive understanding of what they're talking about and what it actually means for the people on the ground. So I know those can sometimes be thinking like that's a big deal and they really just want to hear from you however you show up, but my job will also be to make sure that when you show up you feel ready and have all the information that you need. Thank you for letting me interrupt. Okay, so this is a quick slide about the redistricting and what our districts look like now, and I will give a big prop, and now I've forgotten the name, but Aisha can mention it. He was wonderful and he put together these maps for us, and I had gone through and looked at our maps and kind of zoomed in down to the map, the street level, to kind of understand where our delegation was, what the new districts were, but I am not a map whiz, and they did a fabulous job of putting this together, so big thanks to that. So it's interesting because these districts don't actually exist until January 1 of 2023. So these were the ones that were adopted in September, approved based on the 2020 census. They have been accepted. So what you're seeing is the numbers have changed and there's been a slight reshuffling. And if they were the same districts, yes, thank you, Aisha, Peter. These are the people who currently sit in what would be that seat. If you try to look at the current number, it's not going to match. So I'll give you that heads up right now. I will also say that for all of the districts, the only seat that is not currently up for re-election as Senator Lieber. Yes. And that's why I'm trying not to go to all the names, because there is a race in virtually every single district except for Senator Lieber. So post-election, I will put together for you who is now in each seat and all that. Most of those are going to be the same folks because of the registration numbers. So we probably won't see a lot of turnover in the people who represent us currently, but I will get you a finalized post-election list of our representatives. So this is the Senate. And if the next slide, we have the House. There we go. And open seats mean either they're a new district per redistricting, or there's some that are not running. And on this list, both Representative Campos is not running for the House, she's running for the Senate. And then Representative Scouten is no longer going to be running. So there's going to be a race between two new people for that one. So those are the maps. I use these a lot to know who and what, and when we did the bathrooms, to have an understanding of who some of our legislative champions were and where our bathrooms might fit within those districts was incredibly helpful. And also made a difference for the legislators as they were deciding who was going to give. It was a very weird process, the ARPA, because it was so much money so fast, but that was really helpful to have these sorts of maps to be able to look at the geography and figure out what would make the most sense for the legislators that were involved. And I would say, I think we've also talked about this a little bit, but it is really key, not only that you know the legislators for THPRD, but you also know your legislator, and both the House and the Senate. And I'll let the congressional stuff, you have federal lobbyists, so they're on the hook for that. But to know them, and if you ever want to know, if you don't know and you need to know, or you'd like to know who the legislator is for any particular area, there's a great tool on the Oregon Legislative website at the very front page on the bottom right that you can look up any address and see who the legislators are for that address. So I would encourage you to use that if you ever need to know yours or another area, your family members or a business or something like that. Next slide. Okay, so I was referring to this a little bit, but really you are the experts here. As we went through the steps, I monitor the process, I keep on top of the details and everything, but it's really, you're the ones who know your district, you know your community. A lot of times you know who your legislators are and have had some sort of previous relationship with them. And the legislators want to hear from you because you are either a constituent or someone who represents their constituents and providing services that are critical to those constituents. So don't look at a meeting or a request or an idea to them as a nuisance to them. You are actually giving them the opportunity to support things that support their constituents or their community. And they're going to pass a bill. They're going to provide funding. There's so much that's going to happen. Make sure that what are good ideas and some of the areas that we need funding for are one of the options that they can pick. And if we don't have those meetings and share that information, they don't know that there's that opportunity out there for their constituents or communities. So I just wanted to, I always like to, I'm the conduit, but you are the folks that are the most important. And also, we haven't done a ton of testifying, only because in the way I operate, but we can always shift this as things change or the number of issues we're looking at, our priorities, is I really save you as the board members as the big deal. Like when they're just talking with me, I'm communicating, I'm educating, I'm doing the thing. But when I have a board member come down, it's because this is important. This is a key issue. This is critical. This is a priority. Or if I have a board member come testify, it's because this is critical to us. And that way I try to manage both your time and also let legislators know when we have a board member come, it's important. You need to be, you know, this is somebody that you trust and that you need to hear from. So next slide. So these are next steps, because I always like to give to-dos and some next steps. So we will be going over the platform, I think, next month to kind of go over our previous platforms and update it and make sure we're still in the same or new areas we want to be. We like to focus on the platform on kind of our unique position, organizational values, shared constituencies, or complementary services. So that platform is really a guide to me as well as I'm going through the bills or I'm trying to ascertain what might be the best position for us to take on a bill, to have that platform to guide me. Or if we are in a critical moment and I'm calling Aisha and I'm like, I've got that, we need to take action, or I need to do something really quickly. A lot of times this platform is what helps me to say, okay, here's what I'm going to do right now before I can get that feedback from the board, to make sure that I'm falling within where I know the board has directed me to go. So that's a good one and an important piece of information for me. The next thing to do on here is the THPRD Lobby Day. We did not do one, a really organized one. It's been hard with the pandemic and the virtual meetings, so it didn't really feel like a lobby day. But the last in-person session that we had, we do have a lobby day where board members and staff come down and we meet with the entire legislative delegation. And this goes back to the chair's description of like making sure our legislators know who we are and are educated on our issues. The lobby day is part of that. It is going down, it's giving them an update in person on the district. It's talking about our priorities. It's bringing up issues that we may have. It's that face-to-face. And I always love to have a leave behind that's more than just our platform. So any new maps or an update that we can talk about some of the wonderful awards that you've received because of some of the great work you've done. I like to leave behind those kinds of things. And I love it when I come back. And I think last time it was a majority of the legislators that we gave a new map to. I went back a couple weeks later and they were proudly displayed up on their walls in their offices. So I love that. So whenever we have things like that, let's make sure that we have those on hand to be able to share. And so as we get closer to session, we actually know the dates. They haven't published any dates for anything yet. So that will help us identify some key dates that we'll see what works for the board. And then the next thing is I provide session and bill updates as we go through, as the legislative process goes along. Both to identify bills, to monitor them, to do all of that, and to provide updates to you. And that's something where it is helpful to get your feedback on bills, because I will go through and do a process and I'll work with Aisha to kind of figure out support, monitor, ooh, not so good on this one, and to get your feedback as we go through it, those different points that we can do that, to make sure that I've got the right understanding of where we're at on different pieces of legislation. And then lastly, I do work with partners and other stakeholder groups. Some of these like ORBA, the Oregon Rec and Parks Association. We are member, obviously. Aisha sits on the legislative committee. I sit in on those meetings too, just to be aware of what they're looking at and some of their priorities, and we share what our priorities are as well. And where we can, we partner and support each other. Special Districts Association is another one. There are others. The last one I should have put on here, but the Child Care Coalition that was formed, we also were a part of supporting their big bills the last two sessions. So, and they support, they looked at some of our things and also like on our ARPA, our bathroom mask, making sure that other people are aware. We work with our county partners and different things. So constantly making sure that the people that we work with and that we support and support us know what we're doing, and we try to follow what they're doing as well. So I think that is it. And I try not to talk too fast.
Thank you, Kylie, so much. I think this is really helpful, and it's such a critical role that we can play that staff really can't, right? I mean, we can lobby and spend a lot of time doing lobbying. So appreciate the presentation very much. Questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas? Yes, Barbie.
I'm curious on relationship building side of the house. So understanding kind of to your point, Felisa, about we don't necessarily want the first time we're calling to say, hey, support my bill. If there's an opportunity there, either as just, again, a constituent or wearing my elected hat in terms of providing support in ways that might be, again, a bill that is from one of our legislators, it's their passion and what they're doing. If there's a way in which that we're keeping an eye there to say, hey, Barbie, if you could join, do public testimony here on X, Y, or Z, and it aligns with, right? Like, I'm just trying to think about other ways in which we can form these relationships and to show advocacy that go beyond just, again, for what THPRD needs and where our values lie. Thoughts on that?
Good, that's great. And you're spot on. We actually do that. We do monitor other people's bills, and we'll have some of our legislators reach out and be like, we think that this could be helpful. We know it's not square in the middle of where THPRD is at, but we think it would be helpful to them. And we do provide support or help out when and where that is possible. So you're spot on that we do that. And I would say that one way to try to make sure that when you call, it's not the first time. None of our legislative delegation, except for some of these folks who are just going to be elected for the first time and we haven't chatted with them before, but they have been receiving updates from us. They have had meetings, they will. So it's really lovely that there's very few, maybe your first time meeting that person, but it's not the first time they've met with THPRD, which makes it really a much more accessible process because they can say, oh, I know, yeah, I remember talking with you or somebody from your board about this. However many time has become weird over the last 2 years. But you're, yeah, but you're absolutely right, where we do work to be a good partner to other organizations and associations too.
Barbie, and as you, we're all going to learn about other bills as a direct result of as we continue to engage. And there might be something that really calls to you as an individual, as a mama, as a resident of Beaverton, that maybe it doesn't have a strong connection to THPRD. I mean, remember that you have First Amendment rights. Like, you should go give testimony, and it's a good chance to practice. It's a good opportunity to build a relationship with a legislator. So just, I mean, we're all wearing too many hats at once because that's just the nature of our work. But if there's things you care about, like, utilize these skills in a new way. I think Alfredo was next.
Sure. So being relatively new, I was just curious what kind of events, kind of pre-pandemic, would our area legislators would they be most engaged in with THPRD? I mean, were they coming to, facility openings and things of that nature, or what kind of things really tended to resonate with people?
So I will let staff answer that one because I'll know more, but I do know like ribbon cuttings and grand openings and those kinds of things. I heard about them later about, oh, it's such a great event. So I know, and whatever events they went to, they were very impressed by. So keep doing those.
Yes, we definitely saw some electeds attend the opening of the West Side 18 trail, that one kind of north of Kaiser Road in the Bethany area. We also previously were able to host a bunch of, you saw how many districts are within our service area. And so we invited all of the state senators and the representatives within our service district to come out to Mountain View Champions one day. And we offered up some snacks and also offered tours to elected officials. So we had Representative Helm come out, wanted to see the inside of Cedar Hills Rec Center. He had never been there before. And so we gave him a walkthrough. And so kind of whatever they're interested in doing, we're happy to support that. And I think doing those regular updates that Kylie's been really good about and letting people know what's going on allows folks to connect with us and say, hey, I'd like to learn more about that. So that's definitely something we're committed to doing more of. I think they can always ignore what we want to send them, but when we send them these great images of what we're doing, that really catches their eye and they want to learn more.
If I could add as well, uniquely, you seldom find an individual, particularly that we know they live in the area, there are legislative representatives, that doesn't have a touch point with the park district. Just uniquely, just like each of you, uniquely you bump into this. Oh, I remember when, my kids were young, or I bring such and such, over here. It simply blends itself to this opportunity, because I don't think we always want to be known as the bathroom people. But it's a great start because they remember us right away.
Doug.
Actually, I have to say those touch points are lovely and amazing. That yes, I mean, they all have some sort of touch point and some sort of story, and their kids got swimming lessons at so and so. I mean, it makes thank you for making my job just that much easier, that they all have these wonderful connections to THPRD.
And I would say, I mean, as you're meeting potential legislators, new legislators, like, take them for a walk. Like, we have beautiful nature parks. Rep Graber loves her e-bike. I don't have an e-bike, but if one of you have an e-bike, like, go on an adventure with her. That would be super fun. Tia?
Okay. Kylie, I was wondering, I know the ARPA and our lovely bathrooms and stuff was kind of like a special fund, but I know we had lobbied a little bit for some potential funds from Bonamici earlier last year also, but how often do these like pockets of money or things that where we have to lobby for like a special project that we're already working on or want to work on, how often does those kinds of opportunities come up, or is just like the COVID ARPA stuff just super special with all of that?
Well, the amount that was available and how fast it was available through the ARPAs is very unique. And those kinds of opportunities are going to be very rare. There are opportunities. So in the long session, there are those budget allocations that happen at the state agency level and also the budget reconciliation bill. So each biennium, there is an opportunity if we have a critical funding need for something to go forward to one of our legislative delegations, say, we would like, here's our argument, here's why we want you to consider us one of your most important funding allocation priorities, to do that. You can't do it every session, or I wouldn't advise that we do it every session. And it also depends on the amount that we're talking about, because it's not a huge bucket. We're not talking like 50 million, there's not huge, but there are those opportunities when we have that kind of need to be able to go to one, and we will go to one, but then we will go to all about supporting that request. So as you have either, critical funding needs that we can make an argument for at the state legislature, or like those great ideas about a concept or a legislative fix that we see a strong need for with our district, session is the time to do it.
The long session is.
Yeah, the long session
Okay.
for funding asks, yes.
Gotcha. And do you know what that bucket is normally?
No, I mean, no, it's within the big state budget.
Okay. Okay.
Don't have a specified.
But it's not like each representative gets like a certain amount to like. Okay.
They will do the agency budgets. They'll figure out the state school fund. They'll do all of the big things, get those all funded, and then kind of what they haven't allocated and what they haven't put aside in the rainy day, like all those pieces, they will have some number at the end of session that they will then, that there is some opportunities for this budget reconciliation bill. It's not by legislator, it's not a known amount, but it oftentimes for folks who are requesting some sort of funding request, you're not promised that number. You may get a portion of that funding.
Gotcha.
But kind of like what's left over at the end of session that they have a little bit of, I don't want to call it play money because it's way more important than that, but that discretionary funding at the end of session, that's a much better word to be able to allocate. And
so if you were to get like some of that money, would it have to already be a project that's like thought through, and we would be able to supplement all of that? Or if we don't have the supplementation, then we shouldn't even present it as an option? So those kinds of funding asks, you generally want to have kind of you have your budget, you have, what you've already done, your budget, your plan, maybe it's already underway. You have a solid, it's not we think we could do this. It's okay. Have the plans, we've secured this part of it, we've got the, it's already kind of, it's either in our plan or whatever it is. They also like to put funding towards things that either have a match or have secured, or you've already started and you're just there, the key piece to kind of get over the line, or a critical funds where you haven't been able to kind of bridge some funds or something along those lines. Okay. They did some big, they did it, like the aquarium, getting up money for the aquarium, those kinds of, they do absolutely provide funding. We do have to say, and here is exactly how we will use it. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Representative Nelson in North Portland had a big ask around a swimming pool for I think North Portland. Yeah, of course North Portland, because that's the area he represents. So that's just an example of something like super tangible that had research, very much, in the parks world. But another example might be like, we know there's going to be a lot of childcare bills this year, and some of them may directly impact us in terms of like funding we could receive or staff training. So like that could be something that we add our name to, that we advocate for, that THPRD might not get a big check to buy a new park, but it would directly impact our ability to serve folks. Yeah. And Aisha patiently raised her hand. Thank you, Aisha.
I just wanted to add one thing. I wanted to thank you for the question. I think that ongoing funding is going to be an issue, and something that we're thinking about. And we're right now, and this is a tease for next month when Kylie returns and we talk to you about the state priorities that we have. We're in conversation both with our federal lobbyist and with Kylie on right-sizing our platforms and talking about what our key priorities are. And this is informed by conversations you have at the next meeting. It'll be informed by what we've already sort of gotten our arms around in terms of our values and our priorities. But one thing that we really do think is beyond the very important things like the three pillars, health and wellness, conservation, and social equity, which is where some of the childcare comes in. I think just preserving and enhancing funding resources is absolutely something we're going to care about on the state level and the federal level. And so that means making sure that there is money for the local government grant program, so we can go after things that can help us build parks and trails. And it's also making sure that we are following along with what's going on with SDCs, and we are preserving that as a critical funding element for what we do in our community. So just wanted to give you the tease. We'll talk more about that next month.
Yeah, a little additional support in that effort. The reality is the one-off, very targeted funding efforts they're just going to be that. Very seldom will occur. The challenge is protecting current streamlines of revenue, but secondarily is also advocating for larger blocks of money to be allocated in a grant format that we then can go after. You know, for instance, as you all know, in ARPA, we won indirectly. But when the direct funds were allocated out, we were not listed special districts. So that's an example of, you know, not only do we want after school money grant possibilities, you got to list us so we don't sit in a situation where monies can go to school districts, but not to special districts.
Right. And some of that, preserving those different funding streams and whatnot, is part of the budget process as the agencies take their budgets before the legislature, and being involved and monitoring those to see what kind of funds they're putting for and advocating with those agencies about the amounts they're putting towards any one thing, and encouraging them to look at exactly what Doug was just talking about. And that's one of those things we do work closely with a lot of our partners like SDAO or ORPA, because they are also very keen on those, making sure their members have access to those streams. So yeah, that's also part of that whole monitoring of the situation and getting back to you about where and when we can be helpful in supporting different agency asks.
Barbie?
Excuse if this is a real rookie basic question, but I'm just curious in terms of the board's collective advocacy power and how we have in the past, for example, supported the school district and whatnot. Are we able in the same way to sign on to a bill when like as a collective unit? I see Tia's shaking her head, but I don't think in my tenure yet that has come around. So I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about that.
So we submit letters. They're from the THPRD Board of Directors. And there's been, and I'm not sure when the last one was that we did, where you each sign on to that letter and we submit it in support of that bill. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah.
In essence.
Yeah. Yes. So we absolutely do that when there's a bill. A lot of times, if it's because legislative process is very much a hurry up and wait game. A lot of times we'll be like, yes, we support this bill, and when do we? Oh, it's tomorrow. And so I think we've had like Tia sign on. I'm representing the entire board of directors, but it was from the board. Or I've gotten a signature block that had all of your signatures on it that I put at the bottom, that this is something that the THPRD board of directors supports, and all of your. I mean, we do why, what the issue is and why it matters to THPRD and why we're supporting the bill.
And we've done why we don't support something.
You've also done that. We've had some of those conversations as well. Yeah.
It's when we get there, it is pretty fluid. So it is, we try to respectfully, we don't like putting anyone's name on something if you haven't seen it and approved it. So sometimes we'll default and work with the board president and hope that carries, adequate weight. But it is what it is. You all are very responsible in answering my texts continuously. So
when and if I can, having absolutely the entire board sign on to something is powerful, and it does mean something. And that is my goal when it's something that the board does want to express their support or opposition to. Having the board on there is the kind of the gold standard.
Barbie, did you have another question? Oh, okay. You're fine. You're fine. It's a good question. Well, I think that wraps us up. Thank you, Kylie, so much. Kylie is a wonderful resource. You can email her with additional questions. She's going to help us be informed over the next couple months and really get us set up for success starting in the long session. So thank you. Appreciate it very much.
You are very welcome. I want to say one last thing too. I always have one last thing that I do my darndest, but there are going to be things that you hear about or a bill that you're like, "Ooh, I heard about this that I may not have flagged." Please always bring those to my attention, because the more eyes and ears on this, the better. And two, if you have a unique or special relationship with somebody at the legislature or some connection that would be just of interest, please share that as well, because those kinds of things are the little things that can make the difference when you're having a conversation or having to reach out or make some sort of have a conversation or dialogue. So any of that stuff, please share. And also, if I've missed something, or if you feel like, oh, did we talk about this? Please bring it up. Your ears are incredibly important to this whole process and making sure we're hearing all the different things we need to hear, and I can make sure to be monitoring it.
Thank you, Kylie. We appreciate you joining us this evening, and we get a 4-minute break, and we'll jump into exec session. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.